Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome to the show tonight. Tonight we have a very special interview with Austin Smokowicz, who is one of the design team members of the upcoming game Robotech Revolution. We're going to talk to him briefly about the game, and you'll be able to order it or pre-order it depending on what the exact status is at the moment using the link in the video description. So check that out if you're interested. So hi Austin, and thanks for stopping by.
Hi, thanks for having me on. So the first thing I'll have to say is that it is Robotech Reconstruction.
What did I say?
Revolution?
Did I say revolution? Oh, yes, it is Robotech Reconstruction.
Which is quite all right. No, I don't think we need to do it again. I think we're good. Let's
people expect errors in my live streams. It is okay. It's all good. We are not editing that out for posterity's sake. So Robotech Reconstruction. And what's the before we get into all the background, what's the ordering status? I think you're about to come off of the pre-order period. Is that correct?
So that's correct. Right now we are still currently in pre-orders, but the game is at the printer getting printed, and the plan is once we have it shipped and actually have physical copies, pre-order will turn off. Real copies, real orders will come online. So
and there's not going to be a Kickstarter, correct, or similar crowdfunding campaign, correct?
At this time, there's no plans for a Kickstarter. If you want it early, that's where the pre-orders.
Okay,
that's what the pre-orders have been doing. So it's not a Kickstarter, but we've been collecting pre-orders.
Mm-hmm. That's completely normal, actually, pre-crowdfunding. So let me ask about your background as a gamer. How did you get started in hobby gaming? What kinds of games do you like to play? And what were your influences that led you into designing your own game?
Right. Thank you. That's a good question. So when I was growing up, we had when I was a kid, I had a slate of board games in the house. We had Jenga, and we had a nice little game called Bumper Cars. We played Risk, played Axis and Allies with my friends. The year that I got out of middle school was the first year of my middle school's board game club, and we played one round of Twilight Imperium 2 in there, and played a little trying to figure out how to work BattleTech and nuclear war, with the big spinner where one little sliver will just destroy the entire planet. It was a lot of fun. But then we're talking about continuing on, when I got into high school is when I met Aaron Hanzowitz, which is the co-designer. I'm Austin Smokowicz. He's Aaron Hanzowitz. Together we are Dr. Witz.
The jokes write themselves sometimes.
Absolutely. And so we met each other in high school. And the main thing that we did in high school was we played diplomacy. We played a lot of diplomacy. We had a little group of about 9 of us who once a month we would get together, and whoever 7 was available, we'd get together and play a game of diplomacy. So these types of
the other 2 people were found murdered at a later time.
Oh, no. There's a little trick about that. We came up with one slight little rule change that actually kept the group together as opposed to continuously breaking it apart.
Oh, please tell.
Okay. So the technical term of it is if at the end of a winter, half or less of the players control 2/3 or more of the supply centers, they can declare a joint victory. And it's worded that way because there are many diplomacy variants, and that rule will work for any of the variants as well. And so what it does is it actually allows a grand coalition to form amongst the players in a 7-player game that usually happens when about 2 players have been eliminated. So what a typical day would go for us is everybody get together, you get to go through the exciting beginning game. 2 people would get eliminated, but then shortly thereafter, an alliance would be able to form who had the most, and they were able to declare a joint victory. So it ended the game much earlier than it would go on if you had a solo victory. And it also allowed for more interesting diplomatic options because everybody knew that you still had to worry about your local area first, but then you had to potentially reach across the continent to get in with the player who maybe had won their local competition in order to, forge out exactly, the enough supply centers to actually win as a group. And then you have 7 players, 2 people have been eliminated, 3 people feel good that they've won the game, and that keeps the group coming back again and again to play.
Well, the diehard diplomacy players are howling in rage at their screens
I know. And even in this group, like, just trying to we had to like all agree to play by that rule every single game, because it was always in contention to actually play that way. But somehow we managed to make it work.
All right. So other than diplomacy, please continue, since I've interrupted so rudely.
Right. So no, that's totally fair. And I'm happy to share that little rule with anybody who wants to, play a game of diplomacy and potentially keep your friends along the way. But right. So that's already high school. And then, diplomacy is not necessarily a step into the hobby game, but I was already very interested in board games, and so stayed up to date with the hobby, mostly on like the Euro side of things, just constantly doing that. And it wasn't until many years later when Aaron and I formed Dr. Witz and we started making board games together. And that happened. There's a fun little story about that, where we're actually at Aaron's bachelor party. So he's going to get married in like 2 months. We're having a bachelor party, but we decided to play basketball outside on the hottest day of the year. Not a good idea. We didn't plan for that. But so we get like halfway through and we're tired and sweating out, and we're drinking Gatorade underneath a pavilion. And we're like, well, we still have like half a day, so let's do something else. And Aaron and I are like, well, what do we got? We got some rocks. We got some rocks and we got some people. So we started like creating a game on the spot so that we actually had like an activity to do. And we ended up creating a racing game using betting mechanics, which of course today we've turned into a game called Bookies and Betters, which is actually a game where you have you are doing a horse race, but every player gets to dictate how far the horses move, and you're not betting with the bank, you're betting with each other. So you're playing this information game of at the end of the race, only half of the horses pay out, and they pay out in different amounts depending on what place they finished in. So you can win money by basically short selling horses as well. If people think they're going to make money, but they eventually won't, then you get to keep the cash. And that's how we that was the first, and we've kept making games since then. That was back, and that was about a decade ago. We've been continuously making games, and at this point, we got 5, 6, 7, 8 games in the works. We have Robotech Reconstruction. We have the number of games of ours that have been put out are small. We have 2 published games. This is our third published game, and we have another one under contract. Well, technically 2, but anyway.
So what would you say? Now, I have heard, and I don't know if I heard this from you guys or not, that there are coin-like mechanics in Robotech Reconstruction. So what would you say are the biggest game design influences on the game?
So, okay. So that's another whole story. So
that's the thing I hear a lot. Oh, such and such is a coin game, and this and that is a coin. And I'm like, not really.
This is a coin-like. This is a coin-ish game, and by that, what that means for Robotech Reconstruction is that you have 4 players, asymmetrical powers, asymmetrical victory conditions, but it's a dual layer. There's 2 overlapping systems, right? You have at the base of the game, it's area control, right? So you have 2 players that are caring about exactly who controls what's territories within the game. And then you have another 2 players that are caring about the social condition, a secondary layer, basically a secondary axis in the game. And like the way that works in a coin game is that you have 2 players that worry about territorial control, and then you have 2 players that really care about the hearts and minds, the support of the people. And in that way, Robotech Reconstruction is like a coin game in that way. But there are also many there are many differences. We have our action selection is different. We have a whole card trading system. We have the particulars, and the particulars of the game are ripped right out of the Robotech universe. I like to say that when it comes to Robotech Reconstruction, the game came more from the show, if that makes sense. Like, again, we treat, like, what's interesting about the Robotech community is that this is a series that's been around since the 80s. It's an anime. But at the same time, it hasn't had like a reboot or an alternate universe or anything like that. All this time, like, the history of the show has been pretty consistent. So when you actually look into the universe and like what's happening, it's some of the exact details are different depending on which source you're looking at, but everyone agrees on the broad outlines. Everybody agrees that they treat it, even though it's sci-fi, people treat it like a historical and like history, and we were able to use that in this game and also treat it like history, which is why you're able to really apply some of these concepts of coin and coin-like games that were developed specifically from historical scenarios and put into a board game. And we're doing that same process. We treat it like it's real, and we put it into the board game.
So let me ask, 'cause I'm not like Mr. Robotech by any means, right? I mean, I remember the show, the of course, English dubbed version of the show that popped up. I would imagine that was in the late 80s,
Yes.
maybe mid 80s, something like that. But of course, I remember that, and it wasn't long, and I missed episodes because that's just the way it worked back then. I
Right.
swiftly got lost. It's like, wait a minute, they're on like a different planet now, and I don't know who any of these people are. So where does Robotech Reconstruction fit into kind of the lore of the Robotech universe, assuming you're not a complete ignoramus about it like myself?
Right. So the thing about Robotech is that unlike US shows of the era, because it is a Japanese show, it's one continuous story where things keep evolving, characters keep changing, the plot line keeps shifting. So if you miss like 3 episodes, they are in a completely different place, having to deal with new situations being put at them, put at the main characters. And so with this game, Robotech Reconstruction takes place specifically over the course of 9 episodes at the end of the first season of Robotech.
Okay.
So this time period, what's called the Reconstruction era, is a very peculiar point in the series of Robotech, because up until this point, what you've had is the Robotech Defense Force, or the RDF, the humans, the good guys, the people you follow through the show. And this entire time, they're fighting against the Zentradi, which are the aliens, the bad guys, the guys that are trying to take their ship, the SDF-1, basically the giant robot that's on the front of the box. It's giant, right? So it's this giant spaceship. The Zentradi are trying to get it. The humans are trying to protect themselves and get to Earth, get back to Earth. It's the whole thing. Episode 2, they warp out to Pluto and they have to travel back across the solar system.
All this, right? I remember, by the way.
Right, and because it's good. It's actually good. It's actually very catchy. So we're in this period of time in the Reconstruction era where we are now 2 years after the first Robotech War. So there's going to be more than one when they name it the first. So we're 2 years after the first Robotech War. The aliens and Zentradi have bombarded they attack the Earth. They're like, we're not going to. all this time they've been trying to catch the ship, but they're like, forget it. Let's just destroy everything. Let's kill all the humans. They bombard the Earth, but they're only able to kill 90% of humanity, and the humans are able to stop them. So even though 90% of the Earth is destroyed, and by the way, this is in the far, far future of 2013, by the way. So even though 90% of Earth is destroyed, we still consider that a win because we still survived. So the ship crash lands on Earth, and now the planet is mostly destroyed. And over the course of the next 2 years, we use our technology. They use their technology to try to stabilize everything: water cycle, nitrogen cycle, get plant life working again, keep the people who still are alive on the planet alive, and get society to grow. But the trick is that not every Zentradi alien died over the course of that final battle. Many of them crash landed to Earth, and many of them for the first time, because again, in the parlance of the show, these aliens have been born and bred for war. But for the first time, many of these aliens are now trying to live in a civilian lifestyle. And it doesn't quite work out so well for all of them. But as for the game goes, you have now things have like fractured. You have your RDF government who's like trying to keep control of everything and have their keep watch over the planet and make sure that things are working. But then you also have all these Zentradi civilians that are trying to be civilians, and at the same time you still have commanders of the alien Zentradi force who are hiding out and starting to grow a rebellion against the RDF government. And then you also have this independence movement happening amongst the people, because the human and now humans and Zentradi civilian population, they've been underneath the RDF government for the last 2 years as the RDF military has essentially been trying to, just keep the planet alive. But things are now starting to, work on their own. Mother Nature finds a way, right? So the civilians are like, we want independence from the RDF military. We want to get out from military control. And then what's great is that, as it's represented in the game, not all of the Zentradi are against, not all the Zentradi military are against the humans. In fact, some Zentradi actually defected during the first Robotech War. And they're still more or less fully capable up in space, floating around. And these are the various factions that we bring into the game. So you have your human RDF military, you have your Zentradi military that defected to the human side, you have the Zentradi aliens that are fomenting a rebellion, and you also have a human Zentradi mix of civilians that are trying to rise up and get independence. It's a very particular time of the show, and when you watch it, if you're thinking like, what is happening here, you realize that the main characters, the RDF, they're in a counterinsurgency, because from their perspective, they just see little rebellions popping up all over the place, and they're running around and they're basically putting out fires. But they never realize that they're actually in a counterinsurgency situation, and they have to like actually win over the hearts of the civilians, which is why ultimately it fails. Spoilers.
Well, I think 40 at this point, so I think spoilers are fair.
Right, spoilers are fair game, but yeah. So this is a period of time in the show where you have these various factions running around. You have a bunch of conflicting, you have a bunch of conflicting goals, and that's all represented in the game.
Okay,
what
so
was the question again? Wait a minute.
No, you answered the question totally, which is where the game fits into the lore, the somewhat, I'd say, labyrinthine lore of the Robotech universe.
Slightly.
So let's. We have a visual aid prepared here, so I'm going to pull it up, and we'll let you give us a little more detail about mechanics here. Now, this is Tabletop Simulator. So that means there is a Tabletop Simulator mod floating around. I believe they're called mods for Tabletop Simulator. But
that's right.
But here it is. And I believe this is the very first time in which Tabletop Simulator has been featured in any way on this channel. So So you should be proud. It is indeed an honor.
Well,
Because
thank
we're
you.
normally, let me hide the logo, because we're normally more vassal stuff over here. Not because of partisanship between
no.
Vassal and Tabletop Simulator so much as because of the kind of games I play.
Oh, no, then that's understood. So what we have here, okay, so we do have a Tabletop Simulator mod. You can find it if you search for Robotech. I think it's the only thing in the workshop that is labeled Robotech, so you can find it there. Yeah, so what you're looking at, of course, is our main board in its setup, in its setup state, and you can see that we have 4 seats for each of the factions, and each player, again, it's 4 factions. You have our RDF military, our RDF Robotech Defense Force military. These characters, these guys care about the Zentradi, cares about the hearts and minds. They care about keeping the Zentradi civilians happy. We have our second force, which is the Zentradi Rebellion. Just get in there. It's the Zentradi Rebellion led by Commander Chiron here. They are the Zentradi force that are trying to uprise, their main goal is to get the Zentradi civilians into their army. If they are able to do that, they will be able to, rise up and take control back from the humans. Here we have our Anti-Unification League, the AUF, led by Lin Min Mei, who is a pop star in the world. In fact, at this point in time, she is the most famous person in the world because a lot of it's been depopulated. But she is the face of this faction. And their goal is their whole thing is worried about the independence of the cities. So when you look at this board, there are 5 territories that are specifically city based, if they're able to control all 5, or if they're able to build more cities along the way, which they can build more cities along the way. If they control 5 or more, they will win the game. And our final faction is the Robotech Expeditionary Force. These are the aliens and Zentratis that defected to the side of the humans. They fly around in their own flagship. The commander flies around in his own flagship amongst the board and above the board, and their whole thing is just trying to keep and hold territories for the RDF, because they know that there are other threats out in space that they need to worry about.
Yeah. So let me ask, because I'm kind of getting a bit of a vibe here, if the original Dune board game was an influence on your design.
I enjoy the Dune board game. I now own both versions that Gale Force 9 have put out, but I have to say that I never actually got to play the original Dune, the original Avalon Hill Dune. But that style of negotiation, that style of interactivity, where factions have to bounce off of each other, that is absolutely present in this game, because the heart of the game is the event deck. We have an event deck where we have many, right? There's like 32 cards, so the deck itself is not that big, but each card does wildly different things. And one of the ways that people have described this is that in a traditional coin game, you have many small moves that happen over the course of the game. This game is much faster. A game of Robotech Reconstruction will play in about 2 hours. And what that does is that the tempo is really compressed here. We have factions start right on top of each other. The event cards can create big tactical gains and losses for players if they use the events on them properly. And what happens at the beginning of the game is that each faction actually begins with 4 cards in their hand. And at the beginning of each player's turn, each player gets to go once in a round. At the beginning of each player's turn, they actually get to potentially trade a card. They have the option of trading a card with another player. There's no obligation to play that card, but what it does is that if you want something, if you want a card, if you want an ability that you know is there, you're going to be asking around for it, right? And if players are trying to set up potential combos across their turns, they will be using this time to talk to each other. So this is a game with a lot of table talk, a lot of talk at the table, and as far as I will say that we enjoy while I enjoy the style of Dune, it doesn't have as much, like, because Dune is very interactive and like you build the alliances and you do that part's not here. Each player is in a free-for-all, it is a 1v1v1v1, even though there are players whose units actually help gain control of a territory for another unit, right? The RDF and REF players, their units in the same territory will count for our RDF control, whereas the Zentradi Rebellion and the Anti-Unification League, their units count for territorial control. So even though you have this semi-ally and a semi-enemy and a full enemy who's like directly against you, you do have to be cognizant of the fact that by moving units into certain territories and taking it over, you might actually be giving more of a benefit to your quasi-ally than yourself, and actually giving them moving them closer to victory than yourself through your own through your actions.
So let me ask about, because obviously 4 seats to the game. How does it play with less than 4, or are there bots or some kind of solitaire mechanism?
Right. So right now, this is a 3 to 4 player game. We do have a bot for, if you play with 3 players, we have a bot for the REF. Inside the mod, we have extra components for it. The bot is very simple to set up and easy to use. The way that we do it here is with two small card decks, whereby if there's a territory deck and what we call a drop deck, if the bot ever has to make a decision as to where to go to do something, it will flip over a territory card and it will tell you what territory to go into. When it is the bot's actual turn, it is going to place it's going to place up to 5 units onto the board. And when it does so, you flip over one of these cards and it tells you how many units and in how many territories. And then you just say 1, 2. So in this case, it's going to go to 3 territories. So in territory 1, you're going to put 1 unit. In territory 2, you're going to put 2. Territory 3, you're going to put 1. But then, because the bot cheats, the flagship will also go with it. And if there are any Zentradi units sitting in that territory, they will be destroyed because the bot cheats. Right now, it is a 3 to 4 player game. Aaron and I, we have been working on solo. We've been tinkering with bots for the other 3 factions as well, but that is still in development, and there's no plan right now to make that a thing, but we have been working on it.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, are we dealing with close to final graphics here, or are these still just prototype graphics?
Oh, these are close to final. I think the only thing that's not quite here is some of the cards. I think there was 1 or 2 graphical changes to the rule book as well. But we've updated this TTS to be just near final.
Okay. So let me, I guess this might be completely out of left field, but How difficult was it to get the Robotech license? This is a license that's been active in hobby gaming since the early 80s, as I recall, or maybe mid 80s with Palladium Books, which you'll doubtless be familiar with. And then something happened that we're not going to talk about, and they don't have it anymore. So, I mean, how big a deal was it to land that license? It seems like a big deal license.
So so I can't actually speak to how hard it was to get the license, but our publisher, Strange Machine Games, they have the license. And the only reason this game got made is because I'm in the Northeast region. You know, as a game designer, one of the things that you have to do is you have to play test your games. And one of the things is that there's always,
some would disagree.
I would disagree. Well, it's a good idea to get your games play tested. So there was a once a month meeting put together by a small publisher called Escape Velocity Games. Escape Velocity Games, they would like bring people over to play test their games, and people would bring their games to play test other games. And I'd been going to that for about a year, and the owners of Strange Machine Games also was going to that because they were getting their games play tested and whatnot. And only about a year through that, they have the Robotech license. And at some point they're like, so have you seen Robotech? And this is like back in 2018. They're like, have you seen Robotech? And I'm like, no, I actually haven't watched the show. They're like, you should see it. It's good. It's like, all right. So I watched the show, and because of how I watched because of how I got to watch the show, I come back to them after watching it because I'm watching it with my gamer brain on. I go back to them. I'm like, I got two ideas, and I explained the first one, and they're like, no, we already have that. That's Attack on the SDF one. It's like, okay. And I explained this in the Robotech Reconstruction, and they're like, we don't have anything in the Reconstruction era because, again, it's a very strange period of time in the entirety of the show. So they were like really interested to be like, okay, well, that's a period of time we haven't explored. So show us, put something together, show us what you got. And so we were able to get it going from there. That's the genesis of how the game got formed. So there's that. Now, I will say, as far as licensing issues is concerned, there was a big potential licensing issue just a few years ago, right? Anybody for people who follow Robotech knows that the big news about, what is it now, a year and a half ago, was that the left hand, the Japanese version and the North American version finally came to an agreement going forward. Because it's this whole thing where in Japan, Robotech kept its original name, which was Super Defense Force Macross. So that stayed in Japan, but when they brought it over to the States, they actually merged Super Defense Force Macross and two other series together into Robotech, into what we know as Robotech. And considering the popularity of it, I think they actually did a pretty good job bringing it over. But because of that, that ended up being a split between the Japanese version and the North American version, and it really came to a head just a year and a half ago when like all of the contracts were ending. So there was a point in time where this game was essentially put on hold for like an entire year as we waited for not the publisher, but the rights holder to actually get the deal done with the original rights. So there was like this whole chain that had to be sorted out that were completely out of our hands. That, everything had to work on the top end, and thankfully it did. And so contracts got renewed, and then we were able to actually go forward. With the game.
I'm pretty sure that any licensed game of whatever type is going to run into some kind of licensing hiccup or snafu or delay or hassle of some kind. So this sounds maybe kind of mild in comparison to the torture that some folks have had to go through to try and get their licensed stuff dealt with. And
I do have to say that actually working with the licensor, Harmony Gold, they were actually like really kind to this game. Like the whole delay aside, which, that year delay aside, that had really nothing to do with us or the game. But once we like finally got the game together and presented it to them for like any rights issues that may have come up, there was actually very little hand-holding at that point. There was a very little direction of like, oh, you got to do this or that. It was any changes they had were very slight and didn't touch on, like, they cared. I want to point this out because it's really funny. They cared more about one image in particular in the rule. That one. It's like they cared more about this image in the rule book more than like anything else in the game. And they're like, I just kind of love that like they are a big stickler to detail when it comes to that. And then they were just like, yeah, you're gonna do this strategy game. Awesome. Do it. Just do it. So
yeah, that sounds pretty painless in comparison to maybe it's a Harmony Gold thing, thinking about it. I mean, they, without getting into the long history with Palladium, they kind of let them do whatever they wanted for a long time in a very slapdash and disorganized way. So,
well,
but we're not going to talk.
I mean, I only have one data point, so that's
right.
That's not enough to really prove anything.
No,
I know
I'm
that
completely
hypothesizing. For me and us, that for this process for this game, it went very smoothly from a actual rights issue, from any sort of rights issue.
All right, so let me ask if you have any final comments to add that you think people should know. If somebody, at Origins 2023, somebody, you have a wall of Robotech Reconstructions to sell, and somebody wanders by and says, "Oh, what's this?" What do you tell them? What's your 3-minute elevator pitch to the interested but completely ignorant party?
Man.
Or are you going to hand that off to the marketing guy?
Oh my gosh. Well, the problem is I say problem, but we've been doing this. We've been promoting this game for almost like a year and a half now, and that still feels a little daunting, because what you have is it's a 3 to 4 player 2-hour strategy game with a lot of table talk. This is a great game to sit down with your buddies and be able to smack talk each other and actually be able to pull it off in the game. You don't need to know Robotech in order to understand this game.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things about this design was that while I had watched Robotech, Aaron had not at all. So, and he stayed away from it because he wanted to make sure that the game worked as a game and that anybody walking into it would be able to understand what was going on, and that we were explaining things in a way without getting into the overly technical and sometimes convoluted sense of the source material.
So those of us without Robotech tattoos can play and enjoy this game as well.
That's right. Or if you have a group with one person who's really into Robotech and the other ones who don't care, the players who don't care can still get into this game and still understand what they're supposed to be doing and have a good time doing it too.
Awesome. Well, Austin, thanks so much for stopping by. It's been great having you, and maybe with the next project we can sit down again and have another discussion. Everybody watching, I appreciate you watching the video. So please stay tuned for more content, and we'll see you all next time. Happy gaming.